Thank you for joining the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast with your host, Clayton Craddock.
The musicians that have crashed and burned, that have been part of other scenes, like like jazz musicians that have played on several different records and toured with all kinds of people. You've heard them come in, or you've heard about them coming in and just not surviving. Why do you think that is?
There's a few reasons. One could be something dumb, like Avion mixes. They're not used to playing in a drum booth, or not used to playing with total isolation. There's technical things with the Avion or the video mount. Like sometimes I've seen people like, oh, this Kemper, guitar players use this thing called the Kemper. It's like a computer. It's all these guitar sounds, very complicated. They don't know how to use it. They're not used to it. I've seen that. So a conductor might say, or the sound department may say, something's going on down there. And the conductor might say, there's something going on down there. And they might say, well, that guy's not coming back because he missed every downbeat and the volumes were all wrong and the sounds were all wrong. And that guy could, or girl could be a killing musician. It's just that they might have gotten hung up with technical things. Or there's some players have such character and style in their playing from years of experience, which is what you want. They bring authenticity to the chair, and they're just a killing player, and maybe they're brought into sub on a show where there's very specific music, and it's very written out and it's very specific, and maybe they don't understand, or maybe they have too much. Their style is too ingrained in their playing that they're not able to emulate a sub. See, when you sub, you're supposed to not be noticed. You're supposed to be a clone of the regular, and you should not be noticed. So sometimes players have so much experience and style and such a voice on their instrument that's so unique that, oh yeah, and they're like, oh yeah, I can play these notes, and yeah, I got the downbeat. I see what's going on here. And then they come in, and it's like they're just too much themselves, even if it's hip. The conductor might say, that's not the show. It's not the show. You have to serve the show. And when you're a sub, you're stepping in for someone else. So there's that. Some people aren't good subs. And for that, I say they should be regulars. Somebody with that much style and personality in their playing, you have to recognize what that is and what their strengths are. And there might be a show, and you say that person should be originating a chair, not subbing. Not to say all shows are created equal. Some shows, there's freedom to do that. Memphis was like that, actually. I remember those charts were a lot of lead sheets, a lot of just, we're a band. Do what feels right. And then I left after 6 or 8 months, and then John Putnam came in, and he's not going to sound like me. John Putnam is an originator. He's and he didn't reinvent the book, but he did John Putnam, and it worked because he's John Putnam. So some shows are like that, some are not.
In the 90s, when you were playing in all kinds of bands and you started playing, I guess, was it with David Guest?
He was the promoter, the producer, yeah.
Is that how you kind of connected with Tom Barney and that whole situation?
Yeah, it was a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame gig that Rodney Jones recommended me for, that David Guest was the producer on. And that was like my first real big gig. It was like a bunch of artists, Michael McDonald, Denise Williams, all those people I said, Gloria Gaynor, and Buddy Williams was on drums. Bashir Johnson was on percussion. Tom Barney was on bass.
Wow.
This guy, Kevin Toney from the Blackbirds was on keyboard. And Joey Melody was on key too. That's where I met Joey Melody.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I was only 23.
Is that when you first met Buddy?
Actually, I met Buddy in college. He did a session with Rodney Jones at George Benson's house in Englewood Cliffs. And Rodney brought me along to hang with George, which
Hmm.
was like I was 18. So I met him when I was 18.
And you met Paul McCartney when?
Oh boy. Well, I met him in an elevator by Rudy's Music on 48th Street in the Quad Studios. And
Really?
he was recording Driving Rain or one of those Flaming Pie, one of those records back then. And Dean Moody, who's a friend of mine from Rudy's, was the manager. We called the manager of Quad Studios and says, McCartney really in the building today? He's like, yeah, he's just hanging out. So we came up with a plan that Rudy had some like super rare lefty Fender Strats from like 56 and 57, like in his vault. So we pulled them out so we could use that as an excuse to let Paul, like, does he want to see some guitars, while he's hanging out? And so we went up and showed him some guitars. So that was the first time I met him. And I didn't talk. I was totally speechless. Dean did all the talking. I was like, I couldn't speak. It was unbelievable. Then the second time was that concert later on, that orchestra thing I did. But that was in like 2005 or something like that.
Okay. Did you get
Yeah,
a chance to actually talk with him for any amount
that
of
one
time?
I did because I knew in advance that I was going to meet him, and I replayed. I was like, I can't believe I have a second chance to not make a fool out of myself. Um, what am I going to say? If he says this, I'm going to say that. I'm going to ask him about this, and then if and I'd just been to Liverpool, because we had been there, but I was there another time. And I was like, I'm going to talk about Liverpool, and if he starts talking about that, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say that. So at the dress rehearsal for this concert, I was packing up. I'm like, I can't believe I just backed up McCartney. He was on the stage with me. Like he just walked by me and said hello. Oh my God. And I was sitting there and I look out in the audience, there's like a couple stage hands and a stage manager, and he's sitting in the house, just sitting there. Nobody's there. They cleared out the house. It was like on the dinner break. And I was like, I'm going to go over and talk to him. What am I going to say? What am I going to do? And so the stage manager, I was standing around, I was kind of like maybe 20 feet from him and just kind of awkwardly. And the stage manager I knew from a show I'd worked on. He was like, hey, Michael. He's like, do you want to talk to Paul? And I was like, yeah. He's like, come over here. And then he's like, excuse me, Paul. This is Michael. He's our guitar player. And he just, he's been standing here. Just, do you mind talking to him? I was like, And so Paul was like, oh, hey, how you doing? And then we just started talking, and he was like looking at me in the eye, and he was like really interested. And I was very calm actually, because I had time to process it, and I kind of rehearsed what I was going to say, and then he was very easy to talk to. And then there were some cables from the soundboard like running up and down the aisle, and we were standing over them, and somebody was like, oh, excuse me, guys, we have to move these. And I thought that I was like, okay, well, that was that. And Paul's like, oh, hey, come over here. And he pulled me into a corner of the like kind of the auditorium, and he was like, yeah, so you were saying? Yeah. And like we talked for about 20 minutes.
That's cool, man. Did you ask him why his feet were barefoot on the Abbey Road record?
No, I didn't. But that to me, I was like, I can die now. And then at the end of the concert, I had a camera. I brought it because I knew I was going to meet him. And at the end of the night, flash bulbs and press and like Broadway World or whatever was there. And I was like, I guess I won't get a picture. And I was like, wait a minute, I know this theater. If I go downstairs and around the other side and come up the back staircase, I'll be in front of where he's coming from. So I ran and I grabbed my guitar. And so I was like, because he'll see me with a guitar, he'll recognize me. So there was all these people, and he was like, oh, hey, man. He was like, yay. And I'm like, listen, man, I know there's a million people, but like, can I please get a picture with you? He was like, absolutely, come over. And I had my guitar. He was like, give me that. I'm going to steal this. And so I have a picture of both of us, and he's holding my guitar. It's
I
pretty
think I've
awesome.
seen that one. That's
My
great.
smile is just like, so
You
that
ever
was
get a chance to meet Ringo
no,
or George before he died?
nope,
Okay. Oh,
no. Paul's
that's
the
good
only one.
enough.
Is twice. It's a blessing for real.
You started doing Broadway shows in the
Hmm.
2000s, led to uh, you landing your own show eventually. Which was what?
So I played in a band with Tom Kitt, in the like around when I started subbing on around 2000. And Tom started writing his own shows, and he was working on a show called High Fidelity. But right before that, we worked with this artist, with this comedian Mario Cantone. And Mario was, he's in the Broadway scene. He's, he did Assassins, and he's been on Broadway, but he's a very funny comedian, Sex and the City, So he had a one-man show, limited run at the Court Theater, now the James Earl Jones Theater. And he's like, I just want the Tom Kit Band to back me up. So we were backstage, and it wasn't even a musical. It was like basically just a comedy show, but there was like 3 or 4 songs in it, like an opening number, end of act 1, opening act 2, and then it was like 4 songs, bookending each act. And we didn't have much to do, but that was my first technically my first Broadway experience of my own chair, in addition to subbing all during that time. And then Tom, the High Fidelity show came in, and that lasted 2 weeks.
Matt Gallagher was on that, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Matt was the associate. That's where I'm actually, and I think right before that was Altar Boys. So Altar Boys was where I met you. That was an off-Broadway show. The guitar player, David Matos, was the guitar player on that show. And then he took a leave of that. Well, he needed a sub, and he got my name from somebody. And so I started subbing there. That's where I met you and Matt. And then I left that show to do High Fidelity. I think I came back because then he left, and we swapped it out a couple times because the show lasted a few years. And then after High Fidelity, I got called to do Grease. Yeah. And then Next to Normal was another show I was working on during that time. Off Broadway, I did that. So lots of shows here and there. Evita, I did Evita. I did Baby It's You, Memphis with You. I was the in-house on Memphis.
Is that your first in-house?
Yes.
Now, how did you get that?
So Michael Keller was the contractor at the time who was calling me most of the time for gigs. And inside, recordings and, not just Broadway shows, but little things in between. And I got to know him. And he had called me in between for recommendations too. Hey, there's a guitar player, do you know him? He was starting to lean on me even back then, which is kind of how he is. If he likes somebody, he'll call him again, recommendations. So we were on Memphis. I can't remember why. God, it was so long ago. When was Memphis? 2000 and what? 7?
2009.
Oh, okay, still a long time ago. So I remember just hearing about the in-house contractorship, and I said, man, and I can't remember if I was leaving a show to do Memphis, and I asked about the in-house contractorship, and he just asked me a couple of questions. Well, do you know how to, run payroll? Do you know what to do? And, he tells me it was a gut feeling that it was going to work out. So that was the first show I did that on. And I just, read the contract, and the guy, Keith O'Quinn, great trombone player who I'd done a bunch of stuff with, been on a few shows with. He was like the guru in-house contractor of the time. He very generously shared with me a lot of inside information about it and his payroll templates, and, answered a bunch of questions for me. I never bothered Keller, now that I think about it. I never called him up and said, how do you do this formula in Excel? Or, I remember I never called him up. I just did the work, and I kind of just figured out my own way to do it in that theater, and that was a real learning experience. And then with American Idiot, it was almost like a hook, because he was like, they wanted me to leave, they wanted me to do American Idiot. Keller was like, well, I don't like to poach people from my own shows, but they're asking for you over here. And I was already attached to it. He's like, so do you want to do it? And I said, I think I have to do it, but I really need to have the in-house, because I can't, I can't take a pay cut, and I've already developed a system and everything, and Clayton can do it when I leave. And he's like, all right, cool. So then now I had 2 shows I was doing it. And then when after American Idiot, John Miller called me to do Baby It's You. And I said, well, I have done this in-house contractor thing. And I did Godspell before that too. I don't remember where Godspell. I was the in-house there too. So I'd done in-house contracting about 5 or 6 times, maybe 7.
Tell people what an in-house contractor does and what the expectations are.
So the in-house contractor, every show has one, and they're basically a paper pusher. And really, contractually, the contract says contractor, meaning the CBA, the Broadway collective bargaining agreement, says contractor. Back in the day, every theater had a contractor, and they'd hire the band, do all the things the music coordinator does, and run the payroll. But I think Red Press would have known, rest in peace, but he had a million stories. That I think they ran the payroll. Like I think that it wasn't like the Schuberts or the Nederlanders were running payroll. It wasn't like that. It was like the contractor ran the payroll for the musicians. And I don't think there was like subbing. It was a different world, right? So, but the language remains contractor. So there's not a difference in the contract between in-house contractor and contractor. But the roles have changed so much that the music coordinator, which most of the language about what we do you will not find in the contract. The in-house contractor gets a huge pay bump, a 50% pay bump, to basically do things that are, they basically make sure everybody's there in their chairs, take attendance, and with subs coming through the door all the time, making sure that the sub lists are maintained, making sure that people show up on time, handing out checks, running payroll, house payroll, with the house manager.
House meaning the theater that you're working in, like the Schubert,
correct,
or Broadhurst, whatever.
Correct. And just maintaining records for the music coordinator, and who's that side of the music department head, all under the umbrella of the music supervisor and conductor, maintaining those chairs so that when the conductor gets on the podium and he sees a completely different band every night, that everybody's playing great. Now, it's not the in-house contractor's job to make sure everybody's playing great. It's their job to make sure that there's not people sitting in those chairs that shouldn't be there, as far as like, oh, there's 3 first-time subs tonight. You can't do that. Well, who makes those rules? That's a decision between there's the contract, but some of those rules are at the discretion of the music director and the contractor. Who can be in what chair, what sections? There's sections in the band: rhythm section, brass, strings, and combinations of those players, new players, first-time players, and approved and designated subs. Approved subs means you're a first-time sub, and if you're, let's say, a violist, and there's a string quartet, that's a section. That's going to be a section. So if a first-timer's in, they have to be surrounded by either regular players, meaning the chair holders, or designated subs, meaning people that might be subs, but they've been in enough that they get this status called designation by the music director, which means there's no difference between a regular and this person as far as the rules go. Like they can be there with a first-timer or with anyone. Section rules don't apply. So if you're a first-time sub in a section, everyone around you has to be a regular or a designated sub. Approved means you've been in and you're good enough to come back, and you might be in, and being designated is not guaranteed.
So approved is first, and then designated is later, once you are in enough times where the music director says, I designate you.
Yes. And it's not a guarantee that you'll stay designated. It's rare, but there's times where somebody is designated, they're in all the time, and then they go on tour, or they get a show, and they come back like a year later, and there's different people in the band, and maybe they're a little rusty, and maybe just the show's changed. Maybe there's a new music director. Circumstances have changed. That music director can say, yeah, you know what? They're not as good as this other player. They've fallen down the list. That can happen too. So it's not like, oh, I'm designated, that's it, So anyway, those rules are set up by the music director / supervisor, if there's a supervisor, and the music coordinator.
Now you have the in-house contractor, which is the person that handles the payroll and makes sure that all of the seats are filled in the orchestra pit. You have the music director who directs the show from the podium.
Mm-hmm.
You have the music coordinator, which is somebody like yourself who hires the musicians that go into the pit. Who is the music supervisor then?
The music supervisor is, not every show has one, but they're more and more common now. They are not a playing member of the orchestra or a conductor. They're usually someone now that the conductor reports to, that it's not in the contract. They oversee elements of the creative that are handled by the creative team. They'll be talking to the director. They're a little bit in between what used to be the conductor. The conductor, music director used to have that role. I think that now a lot of times these shows now have become so big, and the demands of the music department are such that a music supervisor allows the conductor now to really focus on the orchestra and the actors. And I think the music supervisor a little bit more of the big picture. They're working with, now you have like TV appearances and now movies sometimes, and composers want to do a mashup of this or that. You're going to have a music supervisor handling a lot of that stuff. They're really the department head. A lot of times once the show's up and running, they're not there on the day-to-day.
And they're getting paid from the production?
Yes, but I don't know how that works. They have nothing to do with me as far as that.
You don't work with music supervisors?
Oh, no, I work with them. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, they most of the time they hire me. That's a very close relationship. Yes. Well, and that's the other thing. A lot of times these music supervisors are doing more than that. They're also a lot of times orchestrators and sometimes music directors. Alex Lacamoire and Stephen Remus are all three. They'll be conducting. They will be the supervisor of all the things I just described. And they might have done the orchestrations as well. And then a lot of times once the show's up and running, they'll step away and someone else will conduct the show, and then they'll oversee the music supervision of the show, and they're still the orchestrator.
You started working on a bunch of different shows, and Michael Keller was asking you for referrals and recommendations. When did you decide to start partnering with him, and how did that all come together?
By the time Kinky Boots rolled around in 2013, he had been telling me, and we had worked together a lot over the years, and he was saying, man, I think this is my last show. I really want to start winding down. I'm getting older. I want to play golf. I want to this, I want to that, And he was saying it enough that during Kinky Boots, we were at a party for the band went out, and he actually showed up. And we were sitting next to each other, and he was starting up with that again. And I said, man, what do you want, like an assistant? And I wasn't saying it like, I'll be your assistant, because it was clear that's not what he wanted. He said, no, I don't want an assistant. People get assistants when they get busier. He's like, I don't want to get busier. I want to wind down. I want to clone myself so that I can go to Italy or vacation or play golf, and there's another me that can show up to the session or do this or do that. And I was like, well, what are some of the things that you need? Because at that time, he was already dumping a couple little things on, like, man, there's a recording session at Power Station. I can't make it. You're going to be there. Can you just file the contract, and you can be leader on the, like I was doing a couple things like and learning, there were some tour things that he was asking me about, and like there were just little things, and I had been in-house at that time already a bunch of times. So we started talking it through, and I was like, well, I'm already doing that. Why don't you, I can do that. So he's like, let's talk more. So we actually arranged to meet at Nathan's Hot Dogs in the Paramus Mall every 2 weeks. We would meet at the food court. That's just how, well, I don't know. That was his idea. Don't ask. And we would try to work out, how can we work together? And the idea started becoming very clear that we should be a partnership, not an assistant thing. And we were trying to form like a business, like, like a partnership, But the problem we were running into was logistically, like legally we couldn't work it out. Some complicated shit we don't have to get into now, but we kind of were about to walk away, say, nah, it's probably not going to work. And then I said, man, look, why don't we just go in on a show together, like two of us, and if one show is cool with it, then it sets a precedent. And then so that's what we did. We just we did the Kinky Boots tour as just two of us, both two names on the title page. We both put our names in the deal, like, so we're a team. So instead of one person, it's two. We just duplicated that arrangement enough times that it just became this thing. And one day he was like, man, we're like Michael Keller, Michael Aarons, M squared,
Okay.
And I was like, cool. And then the idea was we'd be a partnership. And then by the time Hamilton rolled around, people were still calling Michael Keller to do all these jobs. And he'd say, well, I'm not taking any more jobs unless it's both of us. Yeah. So over time, people knew who I was. They knew kind of, but then they were knowing me now as a contractor. And I was getting a free education. Again, another mentor. People might look at us and say, well, he taught him, he sat him down, he picked his brain and ate coffee and all. It was this weird, like, I could read his mind, like we'd never gotten each other's way. We never duplicated efforts, and it always worked, and it worked perfectly for him. And then over time, it worked perfectly for me because I just kind of started doing it. And then over time, he faded into the background and then stopped taking work and made it known, like, whenever the calls come in now, it's going to be just you. And then I just started getting the calls myself. And then I would say, out of courtesy, hey, man, you want to do this thing together? And he's like, nope. And now 10 years later, 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. 2013. So 10 years later, it's, the only show we have together still is Hamilton. Now he has Lion King and Wicked and Book of Mormon.
Jesus.
So he's still got these legacy shows. I don't have anything to do with those shows. And still some people, because those came before our partnership, he was very clear.
Okay.
That's what an assistant would do. An assistant would help him out with stuff. That's how fair he was. He's like, you have nothing to do with those. You're not in those contracts. He has those things came before us. We had the things together, and now the things are just for me. There's definitely delineation. So M Squared Music is my company. I just named it that because I started using a corp and doing everything under my business. But so that actually technically legally is just me, but M Squared is us, because it's named after us.
So when you're looking for musicians, when a production reaches out to you and says, I need a drummer for this show, say for instance, they don't have a drummer for a show that's coming up, and they're like, we need a drummer, bass player, guitar player, and horns and all this stuff. What are you looking for in a drummer that would separate them from anyone else that is, in the running?
The drummer on Broadway is really unique in the sense that if they're, depending on the show and the director, there could be a lot of dance. There could be a lot of choreography. These shows start out in a rehearsal room, not soundproof, not, really meant to have like, a band. And you have to have a drummer who will be able to set up a drum kit and work the room where they're not really needed, in the sense that nobody cares about the drum part other than hits, tempos, choreography. So you have to have a drummer who understands choreographers and directors, because you're going to sit, and this, you're going to have to sit in a room 10 to 6, 7 days a week, 6 days a week, and 3 hours you're not playing a note. And then play softly, or play hard enough that the director will be like, yes, like do the things, and then you're making it up. You're actually part of the creative team at that moment without knowing it. Experts that do this are like Sean McDaniel is an expert at that. Somebody should watch his book if they really want to learn who the best is and why directors, music supervisors, choreographers, composers love someone like Sean McDaniel. He is the Steve Gadd of drums for Broadway, no doubt. He plays everything. He's more than that. Nobody wants to hear the drums in the room more than what I just described. And at the same time, there's changes going by They're cutting bars, they're making hits, they're creating. I mean, when I did American Idiot, they wanted guitar and drums in the room because they wanted the energy of the guitar because it's punk rock. And that was very challenging for me because I had to play with like heavy distortion, but soft, you know, and it's this reverb, like heavy echoey room with an upright piano. It sounded horrible, but like I watched Stephen Hoggett, who I thought the choreography in that show was brilliant. The movement was brilliant. And I'm not really like into dance. I don't really know much about that stuff, but I got to watch it 8 hours a day, like him create body movements and choreography and like how that works with drum hits and guitar hits. And changes are happening so fast and things are happening that you have to be a creative genius to keep up with that. And so that's a skill right there. You can have Steve Gadd in the room and you don't just get to walk in and know how that works. That's a phase of developing a musical theater project that drummers that rely on the drummer that is so critical and important to developing a show that I don't think a lot of people understand. Once you get past that, now you're in the pit, you're in the booth, you're hitting as hard as you want, you're hitting drum pads with electronic, with Ableton and all this stuff. Maybe some of those things were not in the cast rehearsal room, and now you're kind of separated because you have the headphones on, you're in a booth, and you're in the pit, and everybody's on stage. So there's that separation now. There's like almost like a different phase of creation that a drummer has to be hip to. That has nothing to do with like, can you do a single stroke roll with one hand, and play double bass drum, what?
When I see a lot of musicians on Instagram posting videos of themselves playing in a pit somewhere, whether it's a community theater or they're at home playing along to Andy Get Your Gun or whatever. When you see that, are you saying, well, man, this person really knows musical theater, I'm going to take a deeper look at them? Well, what do you look at when you see they're playing on Instagram? Do you look to see that they can do musical theater? Do you look at their style? Like, what is it that you're looking for in addition to their resume that you may consider when you're potentially hiring
some drummers?
Yes.
I listen to how they're hitting the drums. There's certain drummers get a sound out of the drums. And there's certain people who play on the click and put it in a certain place on the click. So where they're putting it to make it feel good for the audience versus the band versus the click, like where they're placing it, but how they hit the drum, the sound that comes out. There's something about someone like Sammy Marandino or Alan Childs, hard-hitting drummers, Rich Mercurio. I'm just naming players that I work with that I know. And I'm not just kissing your ass. I mean, you honestly, you're a great rock drummer. I don't know how many people listening know that Clayton is a killing rock drummer. The way you hit the drum, the sound that comes out is it's not about hitting hard. It's about hitting right. And I don't know what that is because I'm not a drummer, but I know what it sounds like, and there's times where you're on the click and you're not. And it's like, not about, it still feels good. There were times I was playing with Sammy and he's pushing the click, and he's not rushing. It's energy. It's driving, it's feel. And the sound that comes out of that drum, it's like, is it loud? Yes, but it's right. It's hitting right. So anyway, I could go on about my favorite players, but like it's this tone, they know how to tune the drum. They know how to put those gel things. I don't know what you guys do, but something to get it to sound right. Tone is important. I know that from guitar. Tone is important. It's everything. It's in the fingers too. It's how you hold the pick. Like for guitar, you hold different angles of pick really matter. So I imagine it's exactly the same how you hold a stick and where you hit the drum and how the bounce up and the down, all that stuff. I know a little bit, but so when someone's playing drums, if they're right on the click and they're playing all the right notes and they have killer chops, what's the tone? Like, what am I hearing? Does it sound good? John Bonham, like when he hits the drum, there's a big difference. than Ricky Rocket, you know?
If somebody was coming to New York City and
Mm-hmm.
they're just graduating from high school or college, they're in their early 20s, what are some things that you recommend that they know before they try to get into the whole Broadway world and become a musician that plays Broadway shows?
You're not guaranteed a spot. You're not guaranteed a chair. It's different than other jobs. You're not guaranteed any job, but for example, you go to school, you get a degree, you have a resume, you apply, you get a job. It's not the same. It's not the same process. They're coveted, these chairs, and the shows don't last that long sometimes. So it's not guaranteed you work all that way that your show's even going to last. So, and then there's some people who have the chair hold that hold the chairs that are not subbing that much. Some people don't really sub. So there's lots of variables to trying to get into Broadway. It's not necessarily that there are gatekeepers preventing anybody. It's that there's circumstances that lend themselves to subbing and some that don't. But subbing is the path. There is, to me, there isn't really a better path. Some people, they're attached to the project. They might be attached to the composer. They may be from out of town. Maybe they did a tour of it. And the composer or the supervisor likes this person and they invite them to come in. So sometimes you have people that have never subbed, have never even worked in New York. Now all of a sudden they're a chair holder. I got to say, sometimes that's frowned upon. For not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that there are people that have been subbing for 15 years and never had a chair. And they look at somebody waltz into the city with a chair. Maybe there's a good reason for it. Maybe they've worked on the show for 15 years outside of New York. Now the composer says, this is my drummer. This is who I want. And you can't separate that connection. So, there's like I said, there are lots of circumstances that go into why someone is on a chair. The contractor is not the only person that's involved in those decisions. Now that I'm on the other side, now I'm a table cat. So I'm on the other side of the table. I know what the impression is sometimes is like, oh, look at that band. Well, what was that contractor thinking? A lot of times there's other circumstances of why someone's on a chair, for better or worse. And I'm not saying that, oh, maybe people don't like those players. I'm just saying they might not know them or say, how did they get a chair already? I'd never even heard of this person. Your question was, what do you say to a high school or a college person that's trying to get into Broadway? What advice would I give? Is wait in line, because you're not guaranteed with your theater degree, which, by the way, didn't exist when we got into Broadway. Actually, I did a couple seminars. Another contractor, John Miller, teaches at NYU, a class with Ted Sperling. And he invited me to come down and speak once. I actually found it pretty rewarding. I mean, like, it's, part of me was thinking, like, I can't believe they have a class about this stuff. The other part of me was like, wow, I can't believe they have a class about this stuff. The same with jazz. When I was getting a jazz degree, I just did that because that's all I knew how to do. But it's not like I was expecting a jazz job after I had a jazz degree. And there were people back then saying, like, they didn't have jazz programs in conservatories. I studied classical and I'm a jazz musician. So times change. So I would say the advice is you're not guaranteed a job. So wait in line, sub, meet people. Sending your resume and asking people for coffee is going to result in probably nothing. Expect the worst and be really, really pleasantly surprised when things start to click. The prerequisite and the given is that you got to be able to play. You got to be versatile, and you got to be easy to work with, and you got to be on time. Kind of simple, but you'd be surprised how hard it is to find people that meet all those elements.
If you're telling people that, you got to kind of wait your turn and, see what happens, but what if all they want to do is play drums on Broadway? And there's like that's their focus.
It's I'm saying that as a harsh truth, not wait in line. There are other people before you, which there may be. Like I said, there are circumstances that you're not guaranteed a job. I would say expect to sub, expect the show that you're a regular sub on to close in 2 weeks. Expect the person you sub for to call you, you sub, it goes great, and then they don't call you for 3 more months. Expect all of those things because until you have your own chair, you're a freelancer. Being a musician is a freelance job, even if you're a Broadway chair holder. Everybody is a freelancer. So you have to have a freelancer mentality. And I think that people forget that sometimes. And it's easy to forget that too when if you're lucky enough to have a long running show and you're on a chair of a long running show and it's 8 shows a week and it's a regular thing and you can expect that weekly check and everything is kind of stable and if you're financially secure at things, it's easy to forget that you're a freelancer.
And realistically, there are about 5 or 6 of those. You can probably count them on one hand.
The long runnings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Book of Mormon, Lion King, Chicago, Hamilton,
Wicked,
and Aladdin.
All M Squared shows but one.
And what's the one that isn't?
Chicago.
Oh, really? Okay. A freelancer mentality. You're a professional musician. You come to New York City. How does one deal with uncertainty, knowing that shows don't last long,